Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take sources you send us and, well, we dig in to pull out the key insights for you nice and efficiently.
That's the plan.
And today, we're diving into something pretty fascinating. Alternative fuels. Specifically, hydrogen and ammonia power for cars, and maybe more.
Right, and we've got some really interesting stuff to work with. News clips from the early 80s, CBC, CTV, Global, some older documents too, late 70s.
Yeah, and importantly, clips from a pretty recent interview with Greg Vezina, who's been central to this whole story with his company, Hydrofuel.
So for you listening, our dedicated learner, the goal here is to make sense of this long history, maybe uncover some surprising things without drowning you in, overly technical jargon.
Exactly. Let's get started, unpack what happened back then.
Okay, so jumping right in, what's immediately striking from those 80s news clips is, wow, there was real excitement, genuine buzz around this hydrogen and ammonia car.
From the Canadian Alternative Energy Corporation,
Yeah.
CAEC.
That's the one. Yeah, CAEC. And it wasn't some, basement project. It was getting serious media attention.
Absolutely. I mean, you see the federal energy minister, Mark Lalonde, actually driving it around Parliament Hill, or less, Constitution Day.
And he seemed pretty impressed afterwards, based on the reports.
Yeah, and Governor General Edward Schreier, too. He apparently knew something about the tech already, showed a lot of interest.
And there was support provincially, too, right? Like Park Harris in Ontario, he was excited about the idea of, homegrown fuel from electricity.
Especially in Ontario, yeah. A way to get off petroleum.
And the news coverage, you mentioned CBC, CTV, Global, even a national spot. It really shows this wasn't a fringe idea at the time.
No, definitely not. They'd converted a 1981 Chevy Impala?
Yeah, an Impala modified the fuel system, obviously. And the claim, at least in the short tests they did, was that it performed pretty much like a gasoline car.
Which is pretty impressive for that era. Feels really tangible seeing that car back then.
And the person driving this, figuratively speaking, was Greg Vezina. He was chairman of CAA then, and he's still at it today with Hydrofuel.
Right. And that's where it gets complicated, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They had this working prototype, high-level attention. But what were the big technical steps even to get that far?
That's a really good question. I mean, the news focuses on the demo, the success, but think about it. Modifying an engine for ammonia or hydrogen? That's not trivial.
No.
They must have dealt with fuel storage, how to actually done it efficiently, making sure the materials in the engine could handle it, even back then. And the arguments they were making, domestic fuel, less oil dependence, new industries, they're exactly the same ones we hear now. It really shows how long these ideas have been around.
But that initial success, that buzz,
Yeah,
it didn't translate into, ammonia pumps at every gas station.
not even close.
Even back in '82, the reports mentioned this might not be widespread until maybe after 2000, and only if there was real public and political push.
Which, well, history shows didn't quite happen in a sustained way.
So why do you think it stalled? That early momentum just fizzled.
It looks like a mix of things. That initial political interest, Lalonde driving the car, Schreier's enthusiasm, it didn't seem to translate into long-term federal support, money, policy, that sort of thing.
Vezina seemed pretty frustrated by that in the reports.
He did, yeah. He talked about the government being short-sighted, even hinted he might have to sell the tech overseas because Canada wasn't investing.
Which really brings up a key point, doesn't it? You need more than just a good photo op. You need, strategic commitment.
Absolutely. Long-term vision, tying it to economic goals, environmental goals. That seems crucial for these kinds of big shifts.
And the economy back then, early 80s, that played a part too, surely. People expected oil prices to keep climbing because of those energy agreements.
The Ottawa-Alberta agreement, yeah. But they didn't, did they? Prices actually fell later on.
Right, so that probably took the pressure off, made alternatives seem less urgent.
Kind of ironic, isn't it? Falling oil prices seem good, but maybe they killed momentum for change, strengthened the position of, oil.
It definitely highlights how short-term economics can mess with long-term solutions, even promising ones.
And Vezina's take on it from that time is pretty sharp. He basically said, look, we think we can compete with oil without subsidies, but we're not getting a fair shot.
Because of the politics around oil and just the sheer amount of petroleum Canada has.
Exactly. He pointed out the huge subsidies going to, frontier oil exploration, 92 cents on the dollar, he said.
Wow.
And then you look at his project, this new tech, and nothing comparable in terms of support. It just shows the uphill battle against established industries, especially when they have government backing and all the infrastructure already.
Okay, let's shift gears to the more recent stuff, that 2023 interview with Vezina. His passion for this clearly hasn't faded over, what, 40 years?
Not at all. He talks about how he first got interested, saw a story about hydrogen made using solar power. That was the spark that led to the Ammonia-Impala in 81 and that whole cross-country tour they did.
And that meeting with Governor General Schreier in Winnipeg sounds like that was the key to getting the demonstration in Ottawa.
Seems like it, yeah. A bit of serendipity, maybe, being at the right energy conference.
And he mentioned Mike Harris, too, being supportive early on in Ontario.
Right, consistent support there. Vezina also clarified the name hydrofuel. It's their trademark for hydrogen-based fuels. But their main focus, especially now, seems to be ammonia.
Which brings up the safety question. People hear ammonia and they think, well, danger.
And he addresses that head on. He emphasizes, look, it's used safely in huge quantities in industry, agriculture, has been for ages.
Right.
And he argues its safety record, when handled properly, is actually better than gasoline or diesel. Plus, it's apparently hard to ignite, narrow flammability range, not explosive like hydrogen can be.
Okay, that's an important counterpoint. But he did mention needing specific materials, right? Avoiding brass and copper.
Yeah. That's a real thing. Ammonia corrodes copper and brass, so your fuel tanks, lines, engine parts, they need to be steel or aluminum-compatible materials. It's a design consideration.
Makes sense. And he also talked about where ammonia fuel makes the most sense now. Not that much cars anymore.
Seems the focus has shifted. Less on passenger cars, more on the big stuff. Heavy trucks, ships, maybe even planes eventually. Plus, replacing ammonia used now as an industrial chemical. Places where the demand is huge and you handle fuel differently.
And the production side. Hydrofuel getting a license for micro-ammonia production.
Yeah.
Using electrochemistry, not the old Haber-Bosch process. That sounds like a big deal.
Potentially huge, yeah. The traditional way, Haber-Bosch, needs tons of heat and pressure, usually from fossil fuels, very energy intensive.
Right.
Electrochemical methods can work at lower temperatures, lower pressures, and crucially, they can run on electricity, ideally. Renewable electricity.
So greener and potentially cheaper.
Yeah.
Maybe smaller local production plants.
That's the promise. Lower costs, much smaller carbon footprint, more distributed production. It could really change the game for ammonia supply.
And the cost numbers he threw out, comparing shipping hydrogen versus ammonia.
Big difference there. Ammonia is much easier and cheaper to transport.
And his claim about producing hydrogen for under $2 a kilo without subsidies, if that holds up, it really underscores ammonia's advantage as just a way to carry hydrogen.
Absolutely. Which leads us to some really cutting-edge stuff he mentioned, this OPOP photochemistry from the University of Toronto.
Using light instead of heat for chemical reactions to refine hydrogen carriers.
Exactly. Imagine using focused light as the catalyst. He talked about potentially splitting diesel fuel into hydrogen and carbon powder using light.
Wow, that sounds revolutionary. Eliminating hydrocarbon pollution in chemical production.
That's the potential he's pointing to. It's still research, but the implications are massive if light can replace heat in these big industrial processes.
And applying this thinking back to vehicles, retrofitting existing engines, designing new ones optimized for ammonia or hydrogen.
Yeah, he even suggested diesel engines running on ammonia could be more efficient than standard diesel.
More efficient how?
Lower operating temperatures, apparently.
Yeah.
And ammonia itself has some lubricating properties, so potentially higher efficiency and longer engine life. That's pretty counterintuitive, but fascinating.
It really is. So with all this potential, going back decades, why hasn't it taken off more? We touched on politics and oil prices.
Yeah, and there's just that inherent resistance, isn't there? Inertia. Plus the massive influence of the established oil and gas industry, which, as Vezina pointed out, has historically received significant government support.
Reminds me a bit of that other story from the sources, Gerald Schlander and his solar company back in the 70s.
Right, the Consumer Solar Electric Power Corporation. High-efficiency solar cells. Sounded great on paper.
But super expensive initially, hard to scale up, faced allegations of fraud. It just shows having the invention isn't enough.
Exactly. Getting it into widespread use, competing with incumbents, that's a whole different mountain to climb. It's about utilization, not just invention.
And even small things can be hurdles, like Vezina mentioned, a trademark fight with GM over hydrotech versus hydrofuel.
Little battles like that can drain resources for smaller innovators.
Vezina also really hammered home the difference between using hydrogen itself as a fuel versus using ammonia as a carrier for hydrogen.
Yeah, the challenges of storing and transporting pure hydrogen, especially liquid hydrogen over long distances, it's complex and expensive.
That example of shipping it from offshore wind farms seemed pretty inefficient.
It really highlights ammonia's logistical advantages. It's dense, easier to handle.
Someone like Professor Vaclav Smil, who studies these big technological shifts, would probably say, hold on, these things take time. Decades, usually.
Definitely. Energy transitions are massive undertakings. So many interconnected parts: technology, infrastructure, economics, policy, public perception.
But Vezina's looking even further ahead, isn't he? Talking about maybe moving beyond liquid fuels entirely towards energy systems based on light.
That's the really long-term vision he painted. Mentioned ongoing work at U of T, patents focused on efficiency. It does make you wonder where energy tech could ultimately go. A global Manhattan project for decarbonization using light, as he put it.
So, wrapping this up,
Yeah.
our dive really showed this long arc, didn't it? The early promise of ammonia and hydrogen back in the 80s in Canada.
Very tangible promise.
Then hitting all these roadblocks, inconsistent support, the economics of oil, the power of existing industries.
But alongside that, the persistence of people like Vezina and the technology continuing to evolve, sometimes in quite surprising ways.
Yeah, the points about ammonia safety, the potential engine efficiency, those were definite aha moments for me, seeing how long this has been simmering.
It really underscores how complex these energy shifts are. It's never just about having a better mousetrap, is it?
No, it's this whole messy mix of technology, money, politics, infrastructure, everything.
So here's something to chew on. We see these advancements now, the electrochemical ammonia, the photochemistry stuff, plus this global push for climate solutions. Could that vision from the 80s, a hydrogen economy maybe enabled by ammonia, powered by renewables or light, could it actually be closer than we think?
After decades of seeming just over the horizon.
Yeah. And what role does public awareness, maybe even public demand, play in finally pushing it over the edge this time?
That's a great question to leave folks with. And if you do want to dig deeper into all this, check out the show notes. We've put links there to the old news clips, the full Vezina interview, and his company website, nh3fuel.com.
Plenty more detail there if you're interested.